What's up, guys? This is Pedro from My Stuttering Life, where you will hear the good, the bad, the very ugly. We're gonna laugh, we're gonna cry, but through it all, just know that you are not alone. So, let's get started. This is episode number 86, and my special guest is Rob Bloom. Rob Bloom is a creative director at Universal Orlando Resort. He's also a person who has stuttered since the age of 3. Before creating for Universal, Rob helped craft advertising campaigns for brands like the Home Depot, Dunkin, Virgin Islands, the U.S. Marines, and many others. In addition, Rob is an award-winning comedy writer and screenwriter, having written for NPR, The Onion, and the Cartoon Network. I am honored to have him as a guest with me on the My Stuttering Life podcast. Welcome, Rob Bloom.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pedro. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. This is a huge honor. We have a lot of topics to cover, so let's get started.
All right, perfect. I'm looking forward to this.
So, do you remember when you first began to stutter?
I don't I don't remember a specific moment. But I do remember being very young, whether it was 2 or 3 or however old, and trying to, look at my dad and push out the word daddy. I remember blocking. So I have different moments like that from my childhood, but not, exact pinpoint specific moment.
Does it run in your family? Are there any other family members who stutter?
Absolutely. I believe I had a great grandfather who stuttered. I never met him, but there are definitely signs of disfluency in other people in my family. But I don't think they would classify themselves as people who stutter. I think there's just normal disfluencies that everyone has, or not normal, typical disfluencies that everyone has. And I think people who stutter are just more attuned to it, right? And then,
You're
and
so
then,
right.
right, and then hypersensitive about it, and then anxious, and then all of the other things that that uh, that take a typical disfluency and lead to blocking or anticipation or the other behaviors.
Right. Now, during your school years, had you ever had speech therapy? And if you did, was it helpful?
Oh, have I ever had speech therapy? Yeah, I've had speech therapy off and on, for more than 3 decades, and definitely started in the public school system. Um, and we're going back at this point now to the 80s, and um, at that time there wasn't a lot that was known about stuttering, and so I think that the therapy that I originally had in the public school system, or um, whatever the case, I think that it was well intentioned, obviously, and well meaning, but they just didn't know that much. And you know um, stuttering is such a specialty, and and you really have to understand it, I think, in order to do therapy for it, to do effective therapy for it, in my opinion. And unfortunately, some of the early therapies I had, it just it didn't seem like they necessarily understood enough about it to offer effective therapy, in my opinion.
See, and you are so correct because, I grew up in the 1970s, back in the day with the bell bottoms and the hair parted down the middle. And so when I was in speech therapy, they had these huge mechanical recorders, and they would have this long card that had a magnetic strip. And so, I mean, I can recount talking for 10 minutes and then having it recorded and played back to me. And it's like, oh, I said, okay, well, this is not very helpful because I sound horrible. Thank you for this. May I have some more.
Well, it's funny, because you asked me originally if I could remember when I first began to stutter, and some of those memories are a little bit hazy, but I do have really clear memories of some of the my early experiences with speech therapy. So I remember, I remember going to one. Uh, this was actually a private practice, and I remember going, and they had like a like thin brown rubber tube, essentially. I mean, it looks like something you would use on whatever, like a pool or some home improvement around the house. And it was just this long, thin rubber tube, and they had me blowing into the rubber tube. And I don't know why, but I remember being a young kid and blowing into this rubber tube and thinking, oh, well, if I just do this however X amount of times for X amount of weeks or months, then I'll stop stuttering and I'll be fluent. And so I remember putting a lot of hope and faith into this this rubber tube that I was blowing into, and then being really disappointed when lo and behold, I still stuttered.
Well, Rob, you had a rubber tube. I did voodoo. And so, because let me tell you, like you, I thought, okay, so if I do this, I will be cured. And I mean, I walked in, I had my money in my pocket, and so this woman told me to y- take a chair, and then she held a rooster's claw over my head, and she was chanting, and then told me that she will get an egg and crack
Mm.
it, into a glass of water. And so if the yolk held, I was cured. But if it broke, yeah, well, you know.
I thought
Um,
you were kidding at first when you said voodoo. This is
no,
unbelievable.
no, this is
It's unreal.
Pedro wanting to, quote unquote, be normal,
Oh
which I have
my.
found out there is no normal. But she had the egg and she cracked it and the yolk hold. I said, "Oh my god, I am cured." I gave her the money. I walked out. Yes, so
Unbelievable.
extremely confident. Yes, I beat it. I did it. Voodoo is
Mm,
wonderful. It's awesome. And then I went to go order, and well,
yeah. No, I mean, I can't think of, how many times that, I would dream or pray or wish for this magic pill, I never had a chicken's foot or or an egg yolk involved, but I mean, I would certainly, just I had these visions that there was a bunch of scientists in white lab coats, and they were in this research facility somewhere, and they're mixing test tubes, and the Bunsen burners are doing whatever the thing the Bunsen burners do, and there's bubbles that are percolating, and there's like giant machines with assembly lines that are spitting out pills, and I just had like these vivid pictures in my head, and that these scientists were working around the clock. I mean, no one was sleeping, they're just working around the clock, and they're creating this magic pill, and it was just going to show up at my door, preferably the night before I had to do some kind of oral report at school, or I had to read out loud or something. But I think I'm still I'm still waiting for those scientists to make that magic pill.
I think you are going to wait a long time, Rob. All we have is time. And
That's right.
so, talking about school again, school is, it's hard for everybody, the average Joe, but if you have a stutter. I mean, it's just like a million times more difficult. How did you handle school with having a stutter?
Not well. um, in some of the earlier years, as you're learning to perfect your tricks and ways to hide it, right? Because that's a learning process.
Oh, of
But
course.
yeah, but at the beginning, there's nowhere to hide it, or there's no way to hide it when you're doing things like reading up and down the rows, and you're sitting there and you're waiting for your turn to read out loud, and that's just torture because one, you're waiting for your turn. Two, when it comes to your turn, you can't change the words because everyone's looking at the same thing. So that was agonizing. Um, and I would do things like I would count how many people were ahead of me, and then I would count the number of paragraphs, on the page, so I could like plan out when it was my turn. If there was 8 different kids in front of me, then I would count 8 paragraphs, and I would look at it and I would study it, and I would be so ready for the thing that I had to read. Um, and then the teacher might just do a surprise where she would ask a kid to read a second paragraph, or you know whatever the case. And so then like that would completely mess up my counting because I was counting on reading the 8th paragraph, but now all of a sudden I'm supposed to read the 9th paragraph. So you're just you're totally uh just completely taken by surprise. The other thing I would do is try to calculate, about how long it would be before my turn, and then I would excuse myself to use the restroom, thinking that if I just stayed in there long enough, then when I came back, I'd be free, and they would have passed my turn. And I remember this happening on more than one occasion where I'd be sitting there in the bathroom, and I'm didn't have a watch, so I'm kind of counting in my head the minutes, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is surely enough time. This is great." And I'd feel like I was in there forever. And when I'd come back, it was like the perfect moment for my turn. And the teacher was always like, "Oh, good, Robbie, you're back. Now it's your turn." So, well intentions, but just never seemed to work out. In later years, it just became the so much avoidance. I remember my parents talking to the teachers at the beginning of the school year. I remember working out different arrangements with the teachers. So if everyone had to do an oral report, then I would do, a video project, or I would do something else. Um, so that was basically school, either miserably painful, disturbing situations where I'm being forced to read out loud and then being snickered at and laughed at, or like the complete opposite of that, which is just avoiding it altogether and doing something different than every other kid is doing.
Oh, Rob. Rob, I can't I j hearing you, that's my life. That
Mhm.
was my entire life because, that paragraph may as well as b b been a whole book
Yep.
because
Mhm.
you are, like, halfway down the aisle in the room, and you're just looking at your paragraph, and your heart is hurting. Everything
Mhm.
is I mean, just physically hurting, and then when it comes to you and you have a block, and then everyone's looking at you, and then you know, and then you repeat the first letter like 20 times,
Mhm.
and then they're laughing, they're calling you Porky Pig, and so
Mhm.
that only happened one time, and then I told myself, This'll never happen again." And
Mhm.
so, like you, I spent the majority of my school life in the restroom. I
Mhm.
lived in the stalls. Thankfully, I had a Casio watch, that I could play with, back in the day.
Mhm.
Um, but that followed me through college and like you, I mean, in college, those presentations,
Mhm.
I would barter. I said, "I will do all of the work if you just
Yep.
talk. I will do everything on PowerPoint and Word. You just talk, I will do everything." And that's how I survived college. So, I mean, good lord. Oof.
Yeah, it's I yeah, it's so funny. I mean, because I look back on that stuff and it was so yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was traumatizing, and so many of those situations, like I think back, partic you know, elementary school was definitely challenging, but I feel like middle school was the worst in terms of the number of presentations, the number of times you had to read out loud or whatever the case, or speak before the class. And like I look back at that stuff and I'm like, I was pretty tormented by my fear of stuttering and the thought of, okay, in 4 weeks I'm going to have to do an oral report or a speech in front of the class. And I mean, so you've got like the fear of something that's happening relatively far off in the distance, but then you also have the everyday fear of, what if we read out loud today? What if we have to speak in a group? What if we have to do this? So you're afraid of the future, you're afraid of the present, and you're kind of haunted by the past. So you can't win because everything is traumatizing.
Yes, it is. Not to mention physically exhausting,
Hmm. Absolutely.
draining.
Totally.
Draining. But you know what I tell everybody, people who stutter, we are creative. We are resourceful, and gosh darn it, we are resilient because I mean, we have to get back up because, it's called survival.
Hmm.
And I mean, I did everything in my power to just survive. And that was, I mean, I had a lot of secondaries. I would use British accents. I would do everything to just get the word out. And so, I mean, it, it it's just physically, mentally, and emotionally draining.
No doubt. Well said, and just absolutely.
Okay, so do you have any advice for parents and teachers with regards to children who stutter?
Gosh, I think for teachers, it's important. And I don't know this for sure, but I would guess that, that there is considerable more information, that's out now than when you and I were growing up and when we were in school. I mean, I was born in the 70s, but I was going through school, in the 80s. So I would guess, that there's considerable more information and resources and that people are more um that there's just more information available. And I think more documentation about what it's like to read up and down the rows in class. So I think for teachers, there's probably enough info out there that they could read, or they can, get in contact with a stuttering organization or association or support group, and just to kind of take it upon themselves to learn a little bit more about it and what it's like for someone who stutters and what they may be feeling. I know that that sounds maybe monumental for a teacher who is underpaid and already has so much on their plate and so much limited resources that they themselves are dealing with. But if you do have a student in your class who stutters, I know it would mean a world of difference to that student if the teacher were to be at least a little informed about it. For parents, I think almost the same thing. Yes, speech therapy is important if you can find someone who really understands stuttering and knows how to provide therapy for that. But I think It's also important to know, I think, some of the emotional baggage that comes with it. So I would recommend maybe joining a support group or an association just to understand it a little bit better.
That's great advice. Nowadays, like my, you know, grandma would say, just hop on the interweb and, you can find a lot of information. Everything is on the interweb.
Everything's on the interweb. Well,
Yeah.
and the second thing, that I would say is, in terms of learning about, and this is important. So I think this is for both teachers and parents, but in terms of learning about things that you could do, it's also important to learn about things not to do, like interrupting someone or trying to finish their sentences, or breaking eye contact because maybe the person is well intentioned, and they're trying to make the person who stutters feel more comfortable. But in reality, if you're having a major block and the person you're talking to is kind of looking away, it makes you feel worse. It makes you feel you're not valued, or so. I think there's things that they can do, and I think that there's also things that they should not do, and both of those would probably make a difference for a person who stutters.
R Right, and then also, we're all different in our speech journeys. However, we all have that common denominator, and, for me, when I was told to slow down, I mean, that just made things worse.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then the, comment of, "Don't talk to me about it, I want you to sing it to me." It's like, "No, that's not gonna happen."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I remember, hearing all that. I remember a teacher, I remember a teacher just telling me to pace myself and repeating that over and over again. Just pace yourself, just pace yourself. Um, and in your head you're thinking, my gosh, you idiot. But then at the same time, you're just trying to get the words out. So it is tough.
Yes, sir, it is. Now, job-wise, okay, so did you ever experience employment discrimination because of your stutter?
No, honestly, no. And what you said a few moments ago about a journey is so true. I mean, everyone's journey is different, and it's very, very personal. And uh, my, as far as jobs went, I mean, at the beginning of my career, I just would hide it, just like I learned to do in other situations. So I would avoid words, I would substitute. I mean, thank goodness, email was a thing then, because that certainly made it easier for work situations. Um, but so that was the first however many years of my work life was hiding it. Then I went through the big, I'm a person who stutters, embracing it. This is me phase where I would advertise to everybody, and I would go on job interviews and advertise my stuttering. Um, and then I think another part of my journey was not advertising it, but just learning to be more comfortable with it. But I mean, and actually recently I disclosed my stuttering to some people that I currently work with. So, you know, like I said, I mean, much like school, I would hide it, then I would be open with it, then maybe hide it again. But I've never, to my knowledge at least to my face, experienced any sort of discrimination.
When you were talking about job interviews and you would, advertise your stutter, job interviews are extremely Str stressful for everybody. However, for us, it's that little extra that makes it even
Hmm.
worse. How did you handle telephone job interviews? You know those panel ones?
Mm. That was awful. Um, yeah, that was bad. I mean, I remember my first when I was trying to get one of my first, either my first or second job. I remember, and I was trying to get a job at an advertising agency to be a writer, and so in the back of my head, I'm, instantly adding all this additional pressure onto myself because well, if you're in advertising, you have to be presenting your ideas and you have to be presenting to clients. And if I stutter in this interview, then I'll instantly be disqualified and I won't be able to do the job. And so, I mean, it's like it's not just a phone call, but you put the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I remember in one of those early interviews, drinking a couple beers before I got on the phone. And I'm not,
Oh,
by
Rob, we're
any means,
twins.
and I'm not, advocating by any means uh, drinking as a way to control your stuttering. But, like you said, it's survival mode and it's resiliency, and you do, and it's being resourceful. And sometimes you do what you need to do in that moment. So, yeah, those early interviews, especially when you're first trying to prove yourself. I mean, later on in my career, when you at least have a body of work to show, that almost speaks for itself. But when you're younger and trying to prove yourself and you just want someone to give you a chance, yeah, I mean, everything is really riding on that phone call because you know, it's a personality thing. They want to see who you are and if there's a connection. So some of those early early phone interviews were definitely challenging.
See, and to just hear you, I mean, all of the memories that I have regarding this, I mean, they're just popping into my head right now, and, I mean, I can remember, heavy breathing over the telephone, and some
Mhm.
person asked, "If you don't hang up, pervert, I'm gonna call the police," and
Oh,
I
oh,
was
I've
like,
I've done that. I mean, but
"Ugh."
also, yeah, I mean, so like in addition to one time having a couple beers, I mean, I remember, oh gosh, I remember interviews over the phone in those early years when I would, pretend there was a bad connection and it was going in and out. Um, I'd pretend to have have to have laryngitis. Um, just
Oh my god.
anything and everything to
Yes.
there was one time where I pretended that I had gone to the dentist earlier that day, and so my mouth was still a little numb, so I would kind of talk like this a little bit, to act like, well, I just been to the dentist, so my mouth is numb, so that's why I sound like this. But just but you think to yourself, well, even if I get past that first interview, what am I going to do for the second one? Am I going to say that I just went to the dentist again, or that I have laryngitis again, or that So it's funny because you do these things at the time because you're just like you said in this survival mode. But what's going to happen is you can't run from your stuttering, and eventually there's going to be a second interview or a second date with a person, and whatever the case. And like I said, you can't always have laryngitis, you can't always have a bad connection, you can't always have just come back from emergency root canal surgery. Eventually you're going to have to talk.
Right, exactly, because we all have to survive in this world, and, we do what we gotta do.
Mhm.
Let's talk about, everyday situations. So let's do before the pandemic and after the pandemic. That way we can have a compare and contrast.
Mhm.
So how did you handle the telephones before the pandemic and now?
So some of these things, are definitely not as challenging or stressful to me as they were at another part of my stuttering journey. So over the years, I've definitely become more comfortable with telephone calls or drive-through restaurants or ordering food at restaurants. Like those are all things that used to keep me awake at night. Those are all things where I would substitute words, where I would order something different than what I really wanted, just because so I wouldn't stutter on it, or I would point to the dish or whatever the case. So those were all crippling things that over the years uh, I don't feel that same way about them. But I think the biggest challenge for me since the pandemic is probably just um, related to work and meetings. It took so long, like 2 decades, for me to get comfortable in a work meeting saying what I wanted to say and feeling like I was valued and speaking up or offering an idea. It took so long to feel comfortable doing that. Um, and then I got comfortable doing that. And then with the pandemic and having all communication being online meetings or Zoom meetings, that has become just really um, a daily challenge because it brings back a lot of fears, I think, from when I was growing up. And particularly, if you don't have your video on and so you're trying to say something but no one hears you, or maybe you're blocking but people just think that it's technical difficulties or the connection. So definitely I would say meetings, like I said, it took so long to get comfortable with them, and then I did, and then the pandemic, and it's like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden there's all these fears of speaking up in meetings again.
See, and you bring up a great point because now we are being pushed out of our comfort zones all over again.
Hmm.
And now we have Zoom, we have Skype, we have M- Microsoft Teams, and I mean, s- what what has helped me is I just tell everybody. I said, "Look, I'm Pedro. I have a speech impediment. If I stutter, give me 4 hours and the word will come out." And that's my icebreaker. I mean, it works every single time. I love that icebreaker. And
No, that's
so,
fantastic.
I mean, you do what you gotta do, Rob.
You do what you got to do, but I love that because you're also bringing humor into it. That's great.
See, and, you know, now I love humor now, but, back in the day, it was I mean, it was horrible and, traumatic, and, I mean, it's just miserable, but, now I can use humor to help me out because thank God for humor, because, I mean, without it, God, humor has been my life s saver during all of this, so, yeah.
Well, and see, I think that's interesting because, you know, um, me too, and I'm comfortable with myself making a joke about it. But if I go to a movie and there's a character who stutters, or there's a TV
Oh
show and someone who
god.
stutters, like that's agonizing. And I get very, very defensive and very sensitive. Because it's like, well, I'm able to make a joke because I stutter. But for you to, have a character who stutters as comic relief or something, that just really rubs me the wrong way.
Rob, okay, so let me tell you about my movie experience.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know this, you may know this, but, um, so in college, I was pre-law. I mean, I love to argue. I was gonna be an attorney. I mean, I was ready until I watched the movie My Cousin Vinny.
Yep.
And when that lawyer got up, I said, oh, wait, first of all, my jaw dropped. and I could picture myself on that screen, and that was so powerful. Let's talk about the F word, but the other F word, fear.
Mhm.
Fear. It was so powerful that Monday morning afterwards, I changed my major
Mm.
from pre-law to psychology. I mean,
Mhm.
that's how powerful those 5-10 minutes of a movie.
Yeah. So I remember clearly sitting in the theater watching that movie when it came out and loving it. It was hilarious. I was laughing so hard until the stuttering scene. And then it just cut me, and the audience is like, just rolling on the floors laughing in the scene with the attorney who stutters. And just rolling and rolling. And that I was so sad because I was really loving the movie up until that point. And I think it's a great script and I think it's a great movie. I just wish they hadn't gone there. But then to make matters worse, so a few months later, or I don't know, however long, I was in high school and I was taking l- I guess it was a law class or a class about the law. And one day we had a substitute teacher in the class, and rather than teach, he just showed My Cousin Vinny
Oh, no.
as like a way to show like to teach us about law. I guess he didn't have anything else to do. So it was bad enough having to sit through that movie in the theater, but now all of a sudden I'm sitting in my class with students and friends, and that scene comes on again, and it was like I mean, it was like having PTSD and reliving this traumatic experience of people mocking someone who stutters.
Yes, I had that movie on DVD, but it's hence in the garbage. So,
Hmm.
okay.
And it's a shame, because like I said, like it's such a great movie. I just wish they didn't have that scene. But I actually found out years later that that actor, he himself actually stutters. So I don't know if that gave me a little consolation, knowing that he was actually a person who stutters rather than someone who was mocking someone who stutters. But still, it's
Right.
still painful to watch.
Yes, sir, it is. Which leads me to our next topic. So, do you think that it's important to have a thick skin as a person who stutters?
I think it's important to have a thick skin for everybody, honestly. And I'm probably hypocritical for saying that because I am very, very sensitive. Um, I'll watch a commercial, a Subaru ad with like the father and the daughter, or whatever the case, and I'll get tears in my eyes, or every Disney Pixar movie, right? Um, so I'm emotional and I'm sensitive, but in my life, at least, between stuttering and then going into advertising and a creative field where you are constantly getting rejections and being told that this isn't good or that isn't good. Yeah, I think in life in general, I think you'll be happier if you have a pretty good, not to say you should be cold and unfeeling by any means, but I think if you are less affected by other people's reactions and responses to things, I think that's a good thing.
During your school years, in um and did you ever think that you were the only one in the whole world who stuttered?
Absolutely. And I'd li I'd like to think it's better now, and I think it is better now, just, you know, um, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the interwebs, as you said earlier, because, in one ways, there's so much vitriol and hatred and negativity, but in the other ways, it's never been easier to find your people. So I think there's online groups, there's online support groups. You can go on Facebook and type in stuttering and instantly find people who know what it's like. I mean, I found you. So, I think that's fantastic. Growing up, I never knew anyone who stuttered, and I would get, the occasional newsletter or publication from a stuttering association, and they would always have a page in there or a fold out poster of famous people who stutter. But it always seemed like from another time, like it would be Winston Churchill or Marilyn Monroe or, I
King
mean,
George.
yeah, King George. And I was like, that's great. But in the meantime, I'm going to second, third, fourth grade, fifth grade, middle school, high school, and I still haven't met anyone else who stutters. So it's great about Marilyn Monroe, but they're not in class with me. I can't talk to them and see if they're feeling the same thing that I'm feeling. Later on in life, when I myself joined different support groups for people who stutter or went to a convention for people who stutter, like, man, you talk about an emotional experience. I mean, I felt like I was having this out of body experience a little bit because all of a sudden you're meeting people who know exactly how it feels to read up and down the rows, who have hidden in the bathroom stall, who can substitute a word in a split second, and you don't even have to explain it because you just look at someone and you share this connection and you're like, they know.
And there's a quote out there, you know, because you know.
Yep.
Because you know, because growing up during my school years, nobody wanted to hang out with a kid who couldn't talk
Mhm.
and, who would sputter and spit. And so I ate lunch in the janitor's closet.
Mm.
I ate lunch behind the school. And, I'm all through school, I learned to just be by myself, learn how to entertain myself because, no one wanted to just hang out with me. And I did not meet another person who stuttered until my 20s. And
Yeah.
like what you were talking about, we were on a sidewalk and he put out his hand and I knew. I could look into his eyes and I could feel the pain. I could feel the guilt, the shame, anxiety, the fear. I felt everything. I put out my hand and I could not say my name. He could not say his name. But then I said, I know. And let
Yeah.
me tell you, those 2 words, it was an emotional time because my whole life, I thought it was only me. I thought I'm broken. I'm damaged. You
Yeah.
know, I'm never going to get a job. I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have a career. People told me that I should just apply for disability and
Mhm.
just get my paycheck every month. And now that we have the interweb, there are some amazing people out there who stutter, and they are doing their own thing, and it is wonderful. It's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hearing you talk, I'm just filled with emotion. I mean, I remember gosh, I was in my early 30s, and I remember going to um, going to a support group, and just other people were talking, and then I stood up at the front of the room to introduce myself and give a little bio. Everyone else had been going to this group for some time, and I was kind of the new guy. And I stood up there and started to talk, and just like started bawling out of nowhere. I've, I think it was a couple decades of emotion built up, and just pent up inside of me. And I was standing in front of this group and I was looking out at people and looking into their eyes and kind of having that I know connection with them that, the emotion just came like flooding out.
This is powerful. I mean, because no one knows what we go through on a daily basis, on 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 an hourly basis, or on a minute by minute basis. They
Mhm.
have no clue. What For example, people can record their voicemail greeting in under a minute. It takes me 45 minutes.
Mm.
The practicing and the breathing and the practicing, and I mean, it's like when you're done, you're just like, "Okay, I'm drained, I'm going home. I'm
Mhm.
exhausted."
Mhm. Absolutely.
Now, you were talking about alcohol earlier, and so rum and coke is my best friend, and and when I talk to other people who stutter, I mean, it's just split right down the middle. Half tell me that alcohol helps them, and then the other half that it just makes it worse. For me, just 2 rum and cokes. I mean, that's it, only 2. I am I mean, I can't tell you how life altering it is. I am just having a conversation. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm having a good time, and I mean, it's quite amazing, but, after it wears off, it's like, "Oh, hey, Pedro, don't f don't forget you stutter." And so you were talking about alcohol. It helps you with your stutter?
Yes, and I think it's probably a good thing. I mean, I didn't drink at all in high school. I was very, uh, I was just, you know, a, a good kid. Didn't do anything really kind of exciting or scandalous, I would say. But when I went to college and you start going to parties and there's beer and whatever, yeah, I mean, like I think you quickly discovered, like, well, this is a way, um, you know, if I'm at this party, I'm not going to really be thinking about my speech. Um, so, but I think going back to what I said earlier, it may be a fix, but it's a very temporary fix. And it needs to be a temporary fix because you can't walk around drinking all the time. You can't walk around drinking before meetings and
Exactly.
driving, right? So,
Exactly.
it's, it may seem like that magic pill that I was dreaming about for all those years with a scientist in the laboratory, but um, yeah, I'm glad that I never depended on it. I'll say that.
Yes. Um, People have told me that I should drink 24/7. I say, "No, that's not a viable option for Pedro." But thank you. I appreciate your input. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about our toolbox because I have a toolbox.
Mhm.
Rob, I know you have a toolbox, and so I back in the day, I used my toolbox quite frequently because if ever I was having a block, I would use the rhythm method where, I would tap my head, tap my leg, or, I would have a an accent, not a good one, but, viable option, and there were times when I would pretend to not have a voice and whisper.
Mhm.
Um, let's talk about your toolbox. Well, how did you survive with a toolbox?
I think it's some of the things that I mentioned earlier. Having laryngitis, just came from the dental office. Definitely the biggest one was avoiding words. So if I'm talking and I think I'm going to stutter, oh gosh, on a certain word or a certain letter, being able to like, boom, just instantly switch it. Um, Going out to restaurants and ordering something other than what I really wanted, you know. Yeah, I mean, I remember, in the days before, before you can go online and buy tickets to a movie, when you would actually have to go up to the box office and you would say what movie you wanted or how many tickets. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I went to see a movie that I didn't want to see just because when I got up there, like the fear of saying whatever movie was so real that I just backed out. So avoidance was probably the biggest, most consistent thing in my toolbox.
See, and h hopping onto an elevator,
Hmm.
full of people,
Mm-hmm.
and that one extrovert asking you, "What floor, please?"
Mm-hmm.
I would always give the wrong number and then
Mm-hmm.
just get out and just hop on the stairs. So,
Yeah. And these are the things that, like, on the surface, for people who see it, it's just some repetitions or some blocking or whatever the case. But there's so much inside. The elevator example is perfect. The voicemail example is just, there's so much more than what people see.
right, exactly. Now, what is the most effective technique that you do to help you with your fluency?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing is, for me, is just trying to be okay with being a person who stutters. And I've found this to be more successful um, than any specific speech technique that I learned in years and years of therapy. I mean, honestly, probably the most suc successful thing that I've done volunteer is voluntarily stuttering. So, going into a place and intentionally stuttering, but having control over the stuttering and doing this. I can't even like begin to tell you how much that really desensitized me. I think to people's reactions about it, also to just to the idea of stuttering. So that was definitely helpful for me.
Do you ever experience phases in your speech? Like, one day it's fantastic, then the next day it's horrible. I mean, do you go through those fluency phases?
Absolutely. You know, absolutely. And that's also something that's maddening, right? Because you'll have a conversation with someone or like I still after all these years, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to open up about your stuttering. So just, a week or so ago, I really like mustered up the courage to tell someone, who I've known for a year or so, hey, just so you know, I stutter, and if we're having a conversation and I'm blocking, please don't interrupt me. And you know, you always hear well, I've never heard you stutter, so you know, uh, well, that's great. You might not have heard me stutter, and when we were having such and such conversation, but maybe I left that conversation and went to something else, and couldn't get a word out and had to avoid something. So yeah, I mean, it varies. There's ups, there's downs, peaks, valleys, all that.
See, and there were a lot of people, during my, quote unquote good days, they would say, "Oh, you're just faking it."
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Love it. Yes, because it's so much fun.
Oh, it's quite lovely. Yes.
Yes.
So here is a hot topic. We have a couple of hot topics, but here's the first hot topic. All of the answers are split right down the middle, but I just want to, ask you, Rob. So, do you let others finish your sentences?
Yes, but I don't like it. Um, yeah, absolutely. And I think at least for me, it would be hard not to because if you are. blocking and you can't get a word out, and the person, is trying to guess what you're trying to say, and sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. Like, all I'm focused on that moment is trying to get that word out. So if all of a sudden I do a detour and try to correct them on finishing my sentence and ask them not to do that, then that will take even longer to get out the point that I'm trying to make, or whatever word that I was blocked on. So, yeah, I've let people do that.
See, back in the day when they would finish my thoughts, I mean, it would just really anger me. I mean, I would just, I mean, it would also pile on the guilt and the shame. I mean, just everything because I felt like I was broken, you
Mhm,
know. And now that I'm older and reached that point in my life where it's like I'm Pedro. I love myself. I stutter.
mhm,
Oh, well, life goes on. Uh, Now, I tell people, help you, help me, help you, help me, help you, because you don't want me to pass out if I have a block because I don't breathe and my eyes are
mhm.
closed. So, if you know what I'm what I'm trying to say, and please be correct, then by all means. But I feel, and this is just Pedro, but I feel that it's always appropriate to ask, do you mind if, if you're having difficulty, do you mind if if I help you out?
Mhm.
And that I truly appreciate.
That's interesting.
We're all different.
We are all different, absolutely.
Now, have you ever experienced the negative self-talk?
Oh, yeah, sure. And, despite how much fun it is to beat up on ourselves, and to tell ourselves, "Gosh, this is awful. Why are you doing this?" Or "Why me?" Or whatever the case, in the long term, it turns out it doesn't really do a lot of good. It just makes us feel bad, and, you know, uh, I I once heard the expression that, you're your own worst enemy, and I think that's really true, for people who stutter, or at least it was in my case, because as bad, as much as I hated, hearing kids snicker at me or laughing, that's not as bad as the stuff that you tell yourself and how you beat up on yourself.
Right. I mean, during my many, many, many y years of therapy, I did s speech therapy, I've also done hypnosis.
Mhm.
One thing that I learned was to give it a name, and so I call my negative self-talk Oscar,
Hmm.
because back in my day, there was on PBS this, kids TV show, S S S S Sesame Street, and, there was a character named Oscar the Grouch. And so he stood out in my mind later in life when I was in therapy. Um, there was a technique to just name it, and when you name it, you can control it. And so when Oscar would rear his ugly head and tell me, "No, you can't do that. Hello, you will never get that job. You
Mhm.
will never ask that person out. Just don't do it." And
Mhm.
that's when I just tell Oscar, politely to be quiet. Uh,
Mhm.
leave me alone. And that, for me, helped me out because when I named it, for me, I had quote unquote control over it. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, he pops up every once in a while, but when he does, I just have to shut him down.
I think that's fantastic. And it's a great way um, to take away some of the meaning from it, because if Oscar is trying to talk or trying to belittle you or trying to do whatever is not helpful, and shut it down, then I mean, essentially, you're taking away some of the power away from the idea or the fear of stuttering, and that's a great thing.
Yes, sir, it is. Because what I have learned is, once I took back the power, once I took back the control, w- once I found my light,
Hmm.
I mean, that was it. I mean, Pedro is here, and I mean, you can't tell me s- something horrible that I haven't told myself. So, come
It's
on.
true. That is true. We're very good about I think being people who stutter, we're very good about beating up on ourselves and being, having the negative self-talk and all that.
Yes. Now here is another hot topic, and the this one is also a head scratcher, but
All right, I love it.
again, it's split right down the middle. So when you are alone, can you speak without stuttering?
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, when Yeah, yes. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I mean, if I was alone, and I would find a lot of solace in playing with my toys. So, I would find a lot of solace in playing with my toys because, when I was younger, you mentioned Sesame Street. I was like the world's biggest fan of the Muppets, and I really just loved the creativity and Jim Henson and all that. So I had all of the different Muppet characters and stuffed animals or puppets, and I would put on shows just for myself. And I was completely fluent. And this is when I couldn't like say a word, but I was completely fluent. So I would do Kermit the Frog's voice and Fozzie Bear and Oscar the Grouch, and I would do all their voices and me one cookie, and whatever the case. And you do all these different voices, and I was completely fluent. Then when I got older and I started playing with action figures and stuff, I was really into to wrestling. Uh, at that time, the WWF, now the WWE, but I had all of these action figures of Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and Randy
Mhm.
Macho Man Savage and all the guys, and I would stage these like elaborate matches in my bedroom with the figures and the ring and the steel cage, and I would be like the color commentator. So I'm completely alone in my room and I am talking nonstop. I'm talking up a storm. I'm the ring announcer. I'm doing the introductions. I'm doing the color commentating. I'm narrating every single minute of every single match. I would record these. Yeah. So then, in addition to putting on these little shows for myself, I would record them with our family video camera, and like I was a one man show. I was the WWF and I'm putting on these shows without any thought whatsoever to my speech because I was alone and maybe to some extent playing a character. But if you had put someone in that room in front of me, then I would have stuttered. I would have blocked.
See, and I mean, we're all different. And for me, I mean, you know what? I stutter when I'm alone, when I'm talking to myself, as we all do. No judging. We all I still,
Hmm.
I stumble, I block, but when you were talking about putting on these awesome productions, I mean, um, one thing that helped me in high school was the drama club.
Hmm.
They were the only ones who let me in and told me that I could do anything. I mean, and they wanted to put on a play, The Wizard of Oz, and they asked, would I be the lion? And so when you're with people who are nurturing and who are there to lift you up, sure, I would love to do it. And then, walking home, it's like, what have I done? I mean, this is horrible. This is horrible. I got to go back and tell them that, I can't do it. But they told me, no, you will do it and you will be awesome. And when I was on stage, R- Rob, I wasn't Pedro. I
Hmm.
was the lion, and the lion did not stutter at all, and so I did not stutter at all, and, I mean, I could see the people in the audience, their mouths were open, "Ho I mean, how can he do this?
Mhm.
He stutters," and the moment I walked off that stage, I mean, it was like a light switch. "Oh, there goes Pedro," and Pedro stutters.
I give you so much credit for doing that. I really try not to live with regrets, but looking back, being involved in theater and being involved in drama is something that I wish that I had done. Um, because yeah, but I was afraid. I love to do that type of thing. I love to play different characters or to be silly in front of people and like I've just always wanted to do it and I wish that I had. So I give you a lot of credit for having the courage to do that. That's awesome.
Thank you, sir. Now, do you feel that your stutter gets worse if you're tired or if you are exhausted or stressed?
Yes, though I don't like to admit it because I also, in addition to the negative self-talk, I'm really good about putting like unrealistic demands on myself. So, well, I don't care if, you haven't slept. I don't care if, you're really stressed about this. I should be able to be fluent all the time. Um, when that's really helpful to set up those expectations. Yeah, but yeah, I definitely see a difference in my speech depending on the types of situations.
See, and what people don't realize is, you know, when we wake up in the morning, our entire body is tense.
Hmm.
From the time we wake up, 5 a.m., and then the whole day we're either at school or at work. And then when we get home, your body is you don't have many more to give. With having all of your organs tense all day long. When I would come home at like 5 p.m., I mean, I would just plop on the couch. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I didn't want to do anything except be in the darkness and tell myself, okay, tomorrow has got to be a better day. Because it just, your whole body is just completely drained.
Yeah, it could absolutely, it could take a toll. It's, uh, yeah, I agree with you.
During your lifetime, have you ever encountered people asking you during a block if you have ever forgotten your name?
Oh my gosh, yes. Um, and different, just smart responses like, "Oh well, the questions are only going to get harder," or uh, "Yeah, have you forgotten your name?" All of that, absolutely awful.
What I tell people is, uh, 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 if I had a quarter, my driveway would have Range Rovers and Teslas. Just FYI.
Yeah, it's so it's bizarre, because stuttering is, I don't like the word disability, but it's like this invisible challenge. If someone is walking up and they're in a wheelchair or um they are sight impaired and they have a cane, you could instantly see whatever it is that they're struggling with and you could instantly see their challenge.
Right.
But for stuttering, I mean, it's hidden and it could be completely invisible until you open your mouth to talk. And and if you are stuttering, then you always, have that initial reaction of the person's face and the horror or the shock on their face, and that's challenging. Or if you're hiding it, then you've got more of that internal knots in your stomach because, well, I hit it on this last sentence. Am I going to be able to hide it again? It's just crazy.
Yes, it is. I mean, because you hit it right on the nose. Physically, we're 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 here, but once I begin to speak, oh, there it is. There it is. I
Mm-hmm.
found it.
Yep.
You have a disability.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, thank you. So, did you ever think that your stutter might hinder your career path?
When I was younger, absolutely. Like when I was in middle school and high school, and yeah. Um, and I remember a guidance counselor one time like taking me aside and telling me that I should look for careers where you don't have to talk at all. And I remember a guidance counselor telling me that I could be a circus clown or a mime. And I remember someone else telling me, that maybe I should look into being like a park ranger because that would be a job where I could just be like, out in the middle of a field, and just away from people. Um, so that's depressing. Nothing against park rangers. It's just it's not
Right,
what I wanted to do,
right.
or
It's
circus
not
clown
me.
for that matter. Right. I mean, that's lovely if that's your passion. Um, but then, like, I don't know. Like, this is when I was this is this is something strange about me because despite like all of the awful stuff that happened and the mockery and the being made fun of and the isolation and all the negative self-talk and all of that, like when I got to college, I just wanted to start to study advertising and still couldn't really talk that well, still was blocking and afraid of presentations, but at the same time, I don't know, I almost had this thing inside me that said like I can't let this dictate what I do my whole life. So I continued to pursue things I wanted to pursue. Now that doesn't mean, that I wasn't anxious and terrified and actually gave myself an ulcer at one point and, all of these things due to anxieties related to stuttering, but I didn't want it to stop me from doing what I wanted to do.
See, and our paths are quite similar because they told me data entry. I was good for data entry. Woo! I mean, I would do so well. And so, that's what I did out of high school. During high school, I did data entry because there's no human interaction. They just give you a stack of work
Yep.
and then you put in everything. Although, Rob, here was the scary part. So, working at a billing company, you had that front desk person who would
Oh
always,
yeah.
handle the telephones. And when they had to go on break or on lunch, they would call over the PA, we
Mhm.
need help with the telephones. Man, I would run to that restroom. I said, "Oh, here we go again." I would hop in a stall and wait for their break time, 15 minutes, or their lunchtime, be in the stall for 30 minutes
Mhm.
because, I knew that if they had me up there, I would surely be terminated.
Mm. Yep. I'm just sitting here and I'm smiling and I'm nodding my head in agreement because yeah, I have been there, and in fact I actually took a part-time job to do data entry just to make some extra money. And I remember at first thinking, oh, this is great, I don't have to talk to anyone. But then I remember there'd be like an occasional problem with one of the forms or something I was processing that would require wh- so let me back up. I got this job through like a temporary staffing agency, and then then so I'm doing like my data entry, and I remember occasionally you would have to call, and I don't know, you'd have to call like the billing company or something to find out to fix some sort of problem, and I refused to do that. So I went to back to the temping staffing agency and gave them some sort of excuse or reason why I couldn't do that job anymore. Of course, not being honest. And so they gave me another assignment to do. They gave me a new assignment, which was being a telemarketer. And my shift was like from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. So I was literally I was calling people, which was awful. awful, awful, agonizing. Two, I was calling people like literally in the middle of people just getting home from work or eating dinner or relaxing. No one wanted to talk to me. So you talk about the heavy breathing on the phone and getting hung up on and oh my gosh. And oh, awful, awful.
Oh, I know all those days. Whew, all those days. Um, s so here's another hot topic. So, how is dating? Dating is hard, for everybody.
Yeah.
But, if you have a stutter, it's like a million times more difficult. How did you handle dating with having a stutter?
In some ways, it depended on the week, the month, like we said earlier. Um, but once I was like out with a girl, I was better and I was more comfortable and I could be myself. The hardest parts were calling on the phone. This was in the days before cell phones or people having their own number. So if I would call, let's say, let's say I was calling a girl and she lived in a house with four people. I mean, and I call, there's only a 25% chance that she's going to answer the phone. So there's a 75% chance someone else is going to answer the phone and I'm going to block and they're going to think it's a prank call or um whatever the case. I was hung up on. I remember calling and hanging up on whoever answered the phone. So that was a brutal time for sure.
Yes, then we had a caller ID,
Oh yeah.
and they would
Yeah.
call back, "Did you just hang up on me?"
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
And pagers, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I mean, I actually think that in some ways, like it's got to be so much easier now because you can text someone or you can whatever Facebook message them, and that probably makes me sound like I'm 100 years old because I don't know. I don't know if kids are Facebook messaging each other to ask each other out on dates.
Uh,
So I sound like a dinosaur. But
they're
um, but there's
they
other ways.
yeah.
My point is, yeah,
Yes, sir. They aren't on Facebook, they're on the TikTok, just FYI.
the Tic Tac. I love it.
Yes. Now, speaking of technology, what do you think about all this new technology? You have a Google Home, you have Alexa, and then you
Mhm.
have the one that starts with an S, that has Apple, which I can't say. Do you think that this is helpful or hurtful for people who stutter?
Um, I don't know. I mean, who's to say what's helpful and what isn't helpful? And I think it also depends on where people are in their journey. I think that for me, when I was, you know, um, growing up, I would have loved to have things like email. I would have loved to have been able to send the teacher an email to maybe say how I was feeling rather than just suffering in silence or asking, like we said, asking people out and being able to text, or even like when I was applying for jobs in the early stages of my career when email wasn't like such a big thing, like that would have been helpful to be able to send an email to someone or at least try to show some of my humor and personality that way instead of everything relying on a phone call. But in terms of Alexa and Siri and I don't know.
See, and, um, many people that I talk to, they tell me that they practice because, it's a robot, it's not human, and so they practice with Google or Alexa, so, I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
But, my point of contention is why did they start it with a letter that I can't say? So, that's just me.
Because everyone's got a letter or two or three or four that, that,
Or, possibly 26, just FYI. Okay, s so what is a challenge speech-wise that you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
I think the biggest challenge for me of having to overcome was just really. trying not to let stuttering impact my life choices anymore, because it did for so long. It did from asking asking out girls. It did from wanting to be in drama or theater and not doing it, whatever, however many hundreds of examples. So I think I reached this point at some age when I was just, I had this moment where I was flying to Las Vegas for a friend's bachelor party. And I remember being on the plane. And at this point in my journey with stuttering, I was doing a lot of journaling. And this was definitely in the height of the moment, or the height of the journey, with me not being able to order what I wanted to order it in restaurants and saying something else. And I remember being on this plane and I'm journaling, and I was journaling that I'm going to order a Diet Coke, and I'm going to order the Diet Coke because I'm scared of the D and I'm scared of the C, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to challenge myself anyway. And I'm journaling, while I'm waiting for like the flight attendant and the beverage cart to come. And I'm journaling and I'm journaling and I'm writing and I'm writing. And like in the course of writing, like all of a sudden something dawned on me that I didn't even know what I wanted to drink, that I was so kind of confused in my head of ordering things that I didn't want to order, doing things that I didn't want to do, just all in a place to avoid stuttering. And here I was on this plane saying I'm going to order this drink only to challenge myself because I know I'm going to stutter on the D and the C. And like all of a sudden something hit me and I'm like, what are you doing? You don't even know what you want anymore. Like this thing is totally consumed and controlling your life, that if you want to if you want and like I started just thinking about, okay, like if I want to order a Diet Coke because I want to drink a Diet Coke, that's great. But I was just so confused and so messed up in my head, um, and just confused about what I wanted, because for so long my life had just been dictated by doing anything and everything to avoid stuttering. So I really just started to stutter intentionally, like I mentioned earlier. But in terms of is there a challenge that I had to overcome? I think it was just the challenge of stuttering, controlling my life and my decisions.
That's very powerful because like you, I mean, had it had 100% control for over 35 years. I mean, it had complete control. It told me what to do.
Hmm.
I mean, it guided every move of my entire life until I turned 40. 40, that magical number 40. I woke up. I mean, I told myself, that's it. I'm done. I don't care if people laugh at me if I get, on a block. I don't care what your opinion of me is because I'm Pedro and I love Pedro. And, you know, stuttering isn't who I am,
Hmm.
it's what I have.
Hmm.
And, I love Pedro. And so once I did that, Rob, let me tell you, 35 years of guilt and shame and embarrassment, anxiety and fear, it just left my shoulders.
Yeah.
And that was such a powerful day because on that day, I mean, I approached life with a whole new mindset. And I did not care if I had a block because Pedro is confident. He's confident even if he has a block.
Hmm.
And once I did that, my whole life had opened up. Everything had opened up. And I mean, and you had previously had made a beautiful comment previously that I want to talk about. Um, do you think it's okay to stutter, or is it important to keep chasing pl- the fluency gods.
Gosh. I mean, I think it's okay to stutter. I think chasing the fluency gods is the same thing as chasing that magic pill, and I wish that I realized sooner that, that there's no magic pill, there's no fluency gods, and, you know, you're gonna stutter for your whole life if you're a person who stutters. But how you decide to accept that and how you decide to come to terms with it, or like you said, to love yourself despite it, or love yourself because of it, and love yourself and embrace it, um, it really will lead to a happier life.
Right. You are 100% correct. Now, here is a powerful question for you, Rob.
Hmm.
What has your stutter taught you?
A lot. I think resiliency, like you said earlier, absolutely. I think it makes you do a lot of self work in terms of like who am I, and what is my character, and really kind of makes you think about that. I think it makes you really empathetic to other people, to other situations. um I think that I think it's made me, I mean, in many ways my stuttering has made me the person that I am. um I think it's contributed to my creativity and things that I try to do, on a professional end. um yeah, I never, when I was growing up, never in my wildest dreams would I have considered stuttering to be a gift or something positive. But now I look at it and see it's really brought a lot of positive things into my life, and it's made me who I am.
How cool. Whew. That was powerful, Rob. Hold on. Woo. Okay, so what advice would you give to another person who stutters?
Don't. Hmm. I would say, first and foremost, know that you are not alone. I mean, you were talking about young Pedro growing up. I was talking about young Robbie Bloom growing up, and looking at King George, and I mean, you're not alone. I think it's the first thing. The second thing is, it really will get better. It really, really, truly will get better in some way, shape, or form. And that's not to say better in the form of fluency or the fluency gods, but just it doesn't have to control your life. It doesn't have to control the choices that you make. Um, and it doesn't have to stop you from achieving your dreams. A person who stutters can do anything. And the fact that we're about to have the 46th president of the United States is a person who stutters, I can't think of better proof that someone who stutters can do absolutely anything.
And you are 100% correct. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and cannot do in this world because you are awesome. Now, if you had an opportunity to tell the world about stuttering, to give the world some insight, what message would you convey?
I would say that people who stutter are really special, wonderful people with incredible gifts to offer the world. And please, please give them the chance to showcase those gifts. Don't discount them because they stutter. Don't think that they can't do something because they stutter. It may take a little bit longer for them to say something, but don't discount them, um, because people who stutter are really extraordinary.
And that is an awesome, powerful message. And so I would like to just thank you, Rob. Thank you for hopping on this podcast. Thank you for telling your story because I believe that there's healing in in sharing. And so
Mhm.
I want to thank you, thank you, thank you. I've had like the best conversation with you. I mean, I can't believe it's almost 2 hours. We just
That's
had the
crazy.
best time.
That's crazy. Thank you, Pedro. It was definitely a pleasure speaking with you, and this was fun.
Thank you, sir. Now, I have awesome global listeners. What if they wanted to reach out to you? How would they do that?
Absolutely. So, best ways are on Twitter or Instagram, and you can find me in both places at just at Rob Bloom CW on Twitter and Instagram. Rob Bloom CW.
Okay, awesome. We will have those links in the notes. And so
Perfect.
I'm hoping down the road we will do this again because I had the best time. This was a wonderful conversation. I want to talk more down the road if you are available.
I'd love to. I'd love to. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I hope you have an awesome day. Be well and stay safe.
You too, Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
If you like this podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you for listening, and we will talk again.